Rich. Rich. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm especially pleased to welcome our speaker, Governor Christie, and 3 Princetonians who work with him. But before I do that, let me introduce former Governor Brendan Byrne of the class of 1949. And Mrs. Byrne, we're delighted to have you with us. The State Treasurer, Andrew Sidamon Aristoff of the class of 1985. Andrew. And Governor Christie's Chief of Staff, Rich Bagger of the great class of 1982. Rich, thank you. New Jersey is clearly in good hands. I would also like to thank Dean Chris Paxson of the Woodrow Wilson School and Professors Alan Blinder and Harvey Rosen of the Center for Economic Policy Studies and our Department of Economics for inviting Governor Christie to speak to us this afternoon. It is always an honor to introduce the Governor of New Jersey, not only as the leader of our state, but also as an ex officio member of our Board of Trustees. It was Governor John Hamilton who granted Princeton's first royal charter in 1746. And since that time, the holders of New Jersey's highest office have also sat on Princeton's governing body. We're doubly fortunate, therefore, to have with us Chris Christie, New Jersey's 55th governor and a prominent voice in national politics, to say nothing of YouTube. Indeed, the New York Times has described him as one of the most intriguing political figures in America, and Time has named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. New Jerseyans have called him many things, depending on their point of view. But whether Governor Christie is perceived as a breath of fresh air or a gale-force wind, the depth of his attachment to our state and his commitment to reforming its public sector is indisputable. Since winning election in November of 2009, he has, in his words, turned Trenton upside down, beginning with the daunting task of bringing fiscal discipline and transparency, not to mention some black ink, back to the state budget. Within his first year in office, he prevailed on lawmakers to pass an austerity budget that closed a projected deficit of $11 billion, the largest, proportionally speaking, in the country. He successfully instituted a cap on the runaway growth of property taxes at 2% a year. Citing New Jersey's unfunded liabilities, he has pressed for significant changes to state benefits and pensions. In this quest for fiscal discipline, Governor Christie sees New Jersey as a national leader and a model for other states attempting to address a problem that he regards as bigger than either political party. He has also embraced the cause of education reform, calling for more accountability on the part of teachers, greater choice on the part of families, and better outcomes on the part of students in the face of a persistent achievement gap. And locking horns with the soprano state, he has pressed for a more ethical government, echoing his previous public role as New Jersey's U.S. attorney when he combated political corruption and secured convictions or guilty pleas in cases involving more than 130 public officials. But he won my own heart when he made it clear to the community that he would be willing to walk an extra 460 feet to catch the dinky. A lifelong New Jersey resident who studied law at Seton Hall University, practiced in Cranford, and served as a Morris County freeholder, Governor Christie's affection for our state is matched only by his determination to revitalize it. To quote his State of the State address, I believe New Jersey can once again be a beacon, a national leader in everything from economic growth to education, and a wonderful place to prosper, run a business, and raise a family. That is a goal that all New Jerseyans can support, and I invite you to join me in extending to Governor Christie the warmest of Tiger welcomes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank President Tillman for the introduction, for the kind words. I have enjoyed my time so far on the Princeton Board of Trustees, and I thank her and the administration here and the other board members for welcoming me warmly to the board. I have always thought that Princeton is one of New Jersey's most extraordinary assets, and one that should have an even greater and stronger relationship with state government, and through state government, the citizens of our state. And President Tillman has shown herself to be open to expanding and strengthening that relationship, and I appreciate that very much. And we're working together to do it. I not only am willing to walk the extra 460 feet to pick up the dinky, but everyone else is going to be willing to walk the 460 feet so that we can get the type of continued expansion and growth on this campus, both intellectual growth and actual physical growth that needs to be done to continue to keep this campus and this community a vital and growing part of the state of New Jersey. My conversation today is to talk a bit about fiscal responsibility and trying to bring back economic growth in a very uncertain economic time in our country, and to try to do it in a way where you bring the best results as quickly as you possibly can. And that's a very difficult task. I'd say right off the bat that we had a decade under both political parties where there was no sense of responsibility for what they were passing in the legislature and what governors of both parties were signing. There was no sense of how we were going to pay for it. There was no sense of who was going to pay for it. And the overriding sentiment in state government was, well, if it's a good idea, we'll do it and we'll figure out how to pay for it later. And I've said to folks, when I came into the job, I felt very much like I had been invited to dinner, and I'm glad that Governor Byrne is here because I talk about this all the time, and you are referenced as a part of a group in this part of the story, Governor. I feel as if I was invited to dinner by all the former governors, and that we had a great dinner, appetizers and a big main course, and then we had dessert, and we had wine and after-dinner drinks, and then right at the end of the evening, all 7 of them got up and left to go to the bathroom, and they never came back, and I was the one left with the bill. And that's literally what's happened. Now, I'm not complaining about it because when I sought this job, I knew that that was the situation I was inheriting. I didn't know the full depth of it. The full depth of it became very clear to me when Rich Bagger, my chief of staff, and Andrew Sideman Aristoff, my treasurer, came to see me in the first week on the job with a cash flow projection. And the cash flow projection for the state of New Jersey, they informed me, was that if we didn't take immediate action in the first 3 to 4 weeks on the job, the state of New Jersey would not meet payroll in the second pay period of March. Now imagine the state of New Jersey, the second wealthiest state per capita in America, was not going to meet payroll in the second pay period of March. You know, those are drastic times, and drastic times require drastic measures. And so what we did in the first few weeks was to use the powers of the governorship, and I recently watched a documentary with Governor Byrne about the powers of the New Jersey governorship, and they are, if not the most expansive, at least as expansive as any governorship in America. And I was listening to Governor Byrne talking about how he signed an executive order when he couldn't get legislation through to preserve the pinelands. And he signed this executive order basically stopping building in over 1 million acres of a part of the state and said to the legislature and the courts, go ahead, see if you can change that. And they didn't. And ultimately he won a compromise that only political correctness calls a compromise. He won and preserved all that land in the Pinelands. I signed an executive order in my first few weeks that said, without the consent of the legislature, that we're going to impound $2.2 billion of planned spending in the current budget, and that budget then of FY10, without the consent of the legislature and without any new legislation. I declared a fiscal state of emergency and said that it was needed to be done. And I went to the legislature to present that to them and let them know what I had done. And as Governor Byrne mentioned, it's great. One stroke of the pen, you don't have to deal with anybody else, and it's a wonderful power to have. And so we did it and went to the legislature then to tell them what I had done. And basically, I told them I had impounded this money because we had to, because we weren't going to meet payroll, and that we had to be fiscally responsible, and times were drastic. And I did not have time to debate this issue with all of them. And that I had acted, and we were moving on. And I left the chamber. Now, you can only imagine what it was like in the chamber thereafter. I mean, Governor Byrne dealt with a legislature of his own party. I think that was a blessing. I'm dealing with a legislature from the opposite party. And so when I left the floor, they said lots of things about me that I read about the next day in the paper. They referred to me as Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte, you know, all those great leaders of the past I admire so much. It's like they thought they were insulting me, but I thought it was great. And I'll tell you a little bit about government in New Jersey and the current state of government in New Jersey from a fiscal perspective. I'll tell you the end of the story, which is the next morning, the Senate President, Steve Sweeney, and I were walking into the State House, coincidentally, through the side door at the same time. And I said to him, you know, Steve, I read about what you said about me in the paper this morning, about me being Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte, and you know what? You've convinced me. I was wrong. I'm going to withdraw the executive order, and I'm going to announce to the public that the legislature is going to fix the $2.2 billion problem between now and the second pay period in March, when we have to have it fixed by, so we don't bounce checks to our employees. And he looked at me and said, Governor, hold on. Don't overreact. It's just politics. So we think you're doing just fine. You know, just keep doing it. It tells you something about, in a moment of fiscal crisis, in the system we have in New Jersey, it is only the governor who can act with a singular responsibility that looks at the broad statewide picture and not at the parochial interest of a particular legislator in a particular district that represents 220,000 people out of our 8.8 million people. And in the same way, when we approached the budget in 2011, we did the same types of things. And we made a decision, because the people in New Jersey are the highest taxed citizens in America, that taxes were high enough and that we were not going to put up with any further tax increases, that it was time for a true austerity budget. And there was lots of yelling and screaming, as the president alluded to, but we passed a budget with 99.8% of the line items intact as we had presented them to the legislature in March. They did it because they knew it was necessary, and they did it because I was willing to take the heat for it. It was my budget that I presented, and I was taking responsibility for cuts to every department in state government. And a lot of those cuts still are controversial, and a lot of those cuts are still being argued about, some in court, some on your TV screens, night after night after night, through paid advertising. And that's the way it goes when you're governor and you're having to deal with difficult fiscal times. You have to make difficult decisions. But now, what have we seen over the last 16 months in an atmosphere where we cut spending $2.2 billion in the last fiscal year, cut spending to close an $11 billion gap in this fiscal year, capped property taxes at 2%, capped interest arbitration awards to public sector unions at 2%. What are we now seeing as a consequence of that in New Jersey? Just this past week, there was an interesting but a good debate between the executive branch and the legislative branch about the budget. And the debate was, are we going to have $500 million more than we thought we were going to have over the next year, or $900 million more? The treasurer testified that it's $500 million. OLS, the Office of Legislative Services, said it's $900 million. From my perspective, Aristoff went to Princeton, it's $500 million. It's got to be the layup answer, right? Absolutely. But the news is that New Jersey's comeback has begun. And I believe New Jersey's comeback has begun because what people in business and the citizens of our state were yearning for more than anything else was a sense of certainty. Business people and citizens can adjust and plan for anything if they know what's coming. But if year after year after year, the cost of living here continues to go up and up and up at the impetus of the government, and folks don't know how to plan their own budgets and their businesses' budgets from year to year because of that, that's what folks decide just to get up and leave. And between 2004 and 2008, at the height of these tax increases and tax expansions and fee expansions in the state government under Jim McGreevey, Dick Cody, and John Corzine, $70 billion of wealth left the state of New Jersey. That's departed wealth, not diminished wealth because of the financial crisis. Departed wealth, and departed predominantly to 4 states: Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. What do all 4 of those states have in common? They all have lower taxes than New Jersey. All of them. Steve Forbes once told me that money goes where it thinks it can increase and stays where it's treated well. Money was not being treated well in the state of New Jersey, and so it left. We also had a phenomenon called the millionaire's tax. We still have it. Now, see, you got to understand, because this is New Jersey math. So you would think if it's called a millionaire's tax, it means that if you make over $1 million or more a year, you get an increased tax. You have to always read the fine print when dealing with the legislature. You are a millionaire in New Jersey if you are an individual or business who makes over $400,000 a year. So I say to folks from other states all the time, if you're not yet a millionaire because you only make $410,000 a year, but you want to feel like a millionaire, come to New Jersey, where you're not a millionaire, but you can feel like one when the tax bill comes in on April 15th. That phenomenon was established by Governor McGreevey. Thereafter, Governor Corzine decided to up the ante on that. And in 2009, he had the millionaire's surcharge, which was to take the tax rate, which had been at 6.5% and was raised to 9% for the 400,000 and over group. It was to take that 400,000 and over group and raised it to 10.75%. But he said it was only for a year. Well, let's see what happened in that year versus what happened in the year since it expired. In the year of the millionaire's surcharge, income tax revenues from that group, in fact, went down. In the year since the millionaire's surcharge was allowed to expire by Governor Corzine and the Democratic legislature in December of 2009, not by me, by Governor Corzine and the Democratic legislature in December of 2009, income tax revenue from that group has now gone back up. And in fact, testified to by both the treasurer and the head of OLS, was the main driver in New Jersey's increased revenue, was the restoration of more tax revenue from those folks who made $400,000 and over. Now, is this a coincidence? Money not only goes where it can get larger and stays where it's treated well, it also often knows how to avoid the tax man. And smart, wealthy people know how to employ perfectly legal strategies in order to avoid what they consider to be onerous or unfair taxation. And the New Jersey experiment in the last 2 years proves that that is true. And so for those now who say, despite our increasing revenues, that we should revert back to a time where we increase taxes on people at $400,000 and over or at $1 million and over, and those small businesses that apply too. Because remember, when the millionaire surcharge was in place, 50% of the filers under that surcharge were small businesses. 50%. And at a time when we're trying to take our unemployment rate down below 9%. and we count upon small business to provide the bulk of those jobs. The idea of putting an additional tax on those folks, to me, is completely illogical and is only going to be done if you don't have the courage to reduce the size of government. If it's easier just to say yes to all the special interests and go out to and treat the taxpayers like my mother used to tell me about. When I would ask as a child for something new, something I saw in a store that I wanted, my mother would look at me and say, "Absolutely, Chris, sure. You want that? You can have that." I'd be all excited, like, "Great, I'm getting it." And they'd say, "Yeah, here's what you need to do. Go out to the backyard and pick the money off the money tree." I'd look at her and I'd say, "Mom, we don't have a money tree." And she'd say, "Exactly. Exactly, we don't." Yet, the politicians of New Jersey had treated our citizens like the money tree. We want a new program? Just pick more money off the money tree. We want to have a new idea that sounds wonderful, it's going to cost money? Go to the money tree. We have a failed program that's not working, but we just don't have the guts to close it down? It still costed money? Pick more money off the money tree. This was the attitude of New Jersey lawmakers of both parties over the course of the last decade. We can't any longer sustain that. Now, since we've been treating small business better, what's happened now in New Jersey in 2011? We have now had 4 consecutive months of private sector job growth. 4 consecutive months where we've now created over 32,000 new private sector jobs just so far in 2011. Not robust growth, but good growth and steady growth now over the last 4 months. What's happening at the same time? Public sector jobs are declining. In fact, in the last year in New Jersey, no state has shed, by percentage, more public sector jobs than the state of New Jersey, of all 50. Now imagine that a New Jersey state government, county government, municipal government would actually start to shed jobs rather than add them. The reason for this is the 2% property tax cap. Municipalities and counties now know they have a limited amount of money to work with. And given that limited amount of money, they still have to deliver services. And so they need to find more efficient and effective ways to deliver those services. And the jobs that were given to brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and cousins throughout New Jersey no longer can be given, and in fact are being taken away. Despite that, our current roll of public employees in New Jersey is in excess of 400,000. We have more public employees per capita than any state in America. So while we're declining and shrinking the size of government, we still have much more work to do. So that's why you see the unemployment rate still at 9.3% in New Jersey. Despite this fairly steady and significant private sector job growth, we're having public sector job loss. And we're having more people, because of the bettering economy in New Jersey, getting back into the job market and looking for jobs again. People who had given up over the last 2 years are coming back into the system, and as a result, the unemployment rate is affected less. This is all, in the end, about fiscal discipline. It's about being able to say no. It's about being able to sustain the political attacks that come when you say no. And it's not about playing favorites, because as I said before, our entire state government, every department, was cut in fiscal year 2011, the year that we're in. And our next year's budget, which is being considered now by the legislature, it is down again 2.6% in real spending, not projected growth, but in real spending, year to year, down 2.6%. So we are doing what we were sent here to do. Believe me, I am under no illusion that I was elected governor of New Jersey based on my charm and good looks. I think I was elected governor of New Jersey for the same reasons that Governor Byrne was elected governor of New Jersey in 1973. In those years, we had gone through enormous turmoil, with people questioning both the sanity and the ethics of our elected officials. And off of the Superior Court bench in Essex County came the former Essex County prosecutor, who a mobster was heard saying on a tape, "He can't be bought." Brendan Byrne was and is the man who can't be bought. And people found out that he had a great sense of humor. People found out that he had a wonderful, uplifting spirit. But I don't believe that's why they voted for him, and I won't comment on the good looks part of it. They might have voted on the good looks, I'm not sure. But they voted for him because they believed that New Jersey needed someone in the governorship in 1973 who was not going to knuckle under to the traditional forces of the special interests and was going to put the people's interests first. And whether you agree or disagree with every one of Governor Byrne's policies, which were aggressive policies, which were ideological policies, they were policies that pushed the state in the direction that he believed the state needed to be pushed, and he did it strongly and without compromise. 36 years later, I think the state of New Jersey found themselves in a very similar place. Adrift with a lack of leadership, questioning the ethics of their public officials, and questioning the wisdom of public officials who had gone on a 10-year spending spree without discipline and without regard to the cost that that spending spree had inflicted upon the public. And so I've often said that while some people have tried to analogize my election in 2009 to Governor Kane's election in 1981, I have always believed that the analogy is much more apt between my election in 2009 and Governor Byrne's election in 1973. Similar people of similar backgrounds from different parties confronting a corrupt New Jersey, a dysfunctional New Jersey, a legislature unwilling to act in any way other than in favor of the special interest, who needed a strong hand to be able to bring the state back to fiscal discipline and economic growth. And the state that he turned over to Governor Kane in 1982 was one that, while in a bit of a dip at that moment, roared back in the 80s to some of the greatest economic growth the state has ever seen. And I would argue, and I think Governor Kane would agree, that much of the groundwork for that was laid by the 8 years that Governor Byrne served and made difficult decisions, and often unpopular decisions, on behalf of the people of the state. Closing an $11 billion budget deficit without new taxes and with hard cuts isn't popular, but it's what needed to be done. And so we live in a different time in America now, which I think necessitates different demands from all of you on your elected officials. If you want sunshine and candygrams, you can have them. And there are plenty of candidates out there who are willing to give them to you. But they come at an enormous cost. And the cost may not be paid by you, but most certainly will be paid by our children. Because America is now borrowing 40 cents out of every dollar it spends. New Jersey has an underfunded pension system to the amount of $54 billion. New Jersey has an underfunded retiree health insurance system to the tune of $67 billion. And that is all at the same time, while we still have the third highest income tax in America, one of the highest sales taxes in America, one of the highest corporate business taxes in America, and the highest property taxes in America. Logic tells me that we've kind of maxed out the tax side of this equation, and that we now have to deal with discipline again and deal with saying no. I have often said, and I know Governor Byrne has felt this way too, we all wish. I had a woman who came up to me a couple of months ago, and she said, "You know, Governor, I like what you're doing, but it's so tough, and it's so, you've got to be harsh at times." And she said, "Why can't you be more like Governor Kane?" And I said, "Well, if I had bags of money to give out all over New Jersey, I could be more like Governor Kane." In the 1980s, Governor Kane's biggest problem was counting the money that was coming into the Treasury. It was coming in so fast. And I once asked Governor Kane, you know, the state budget doubled in your 8 years. How do you justify that? And in typical Tom Kane fashion, he looked at me and said, well, Chris, the people wanted me to spend the money. I think the people want something very different now. I think they want a governor who says no. No. We will protect the most unfortunate. We will have a safety net for those who need to use it. We will not cut charity care to hospitals. We will not cut money to families who are dealing with children who have autism at the highest rate of any state in America. We will not cut back on health care for the poor. But we will no longer put up with every program that every legislator ever dreamed about being funded by all of you at a time when you're struggling to make ends meet, to afford to send your children to school, to pay the mortgage, to pay the gas bill. We need to be disciplined again. And I think that's what I was sent to Trenton to do. So we're moving forward. Things are getting better, but we can't undo a decade's worth of harm in a year and a half. And so my message to the people of New Jersey and to all of you is pretty simple. We can't stop now. Just because we see a glimmer of light does not mean we can stop on this journey. It is going to take at least a full 4 years, I think, of this kind of effort to make sure that we ensure our children's future, a future where they not only want to live in New Jersey, but can afford to live here. In the end, I think that's what we all want who live here. I know I don't want to get on an airplane someday, God willing, to visit my grandchildren. I'd rather do what my parents got the chance to do, which is to get in their car and drive a half an hour to either that Little League game or that soccer game, to that Christmas play or spring concert, or to that little birthday party that you have around the kitchen table. Those are the things that make our life rich. And those are the things that we're putting at risk if we're unwilling to say no. And so when New York Magazine did a profile on me recently, the title of the article was "The Answer is No." My senior staff, led by your very funny chief of staff and alumnus here, Xeroxed that and hung it on their doors in every one of their offices, so that when the special interests came in to ask for something, they did not have to say no. They just pointed up to the article, said, see, he says the answer is no. I have no leeway. And Shirley mentioned that the New York Times wrote that I'm one of the most intriguing political figures in America. As a Republican, getting that in the New York Times, you breathe a sigh of relief knowing they didn't finish the sentence. There was no explanation as to why they believe I'm intriguing. So we'll leave it to our imagination and hope that it's a good thing. But the one other thing the New York Times did for me recently was to do a New York Times Magazine profile. Now, when you agree as a Republican to a New York Times Magazine profile, it is a moment of high anxiety, because you just shouldn't go well. And in the end, it went fine. And I said this to the folks, the graduates at Seton Hall University, and I'll conclude with this. I didn't know how the article was going to go, and a couple of days before that Sunday, they sent us the copy of the cover. It turns out I was going to be on the cover, and they have one of those disturbingly close pictures of me. You know, and we don't want a real tight close-up here, you know what I'm saying? We like a little perspective. But they decided to go with the disturbingly close-up picture. And the title of the article turned out to be something that I now really embrace. The title of the article was "The Disruptor." And I think, given where we stand in American life right now, that we need all of us to consider how we can be disruptors, how we can, in our own ways, in our own professions, in our own pursuits, disrupt the status quo, disrupt what ails America. We're not always going to agree about what we choose to disrupt or how we choose to do it. But I do think that this is a moment in our history which calls for American activism again at home, to try to preserve our way of life for the next generations. That's why I'm disrupting New Jersey in the way I am. And I think that the early results show that we're making progress, and I hope we continue to see that going forward. So thank you all very much. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thanks very much. My name is Chris Paxson. I'm Dean of the Woodrow Wilson School, and I am going to moderate some questions. When we host talks at the Woodrow Wilson School, I know classes are over, the students have gone, but I think there are some students in the audience. We usually like to make sure that the first 3 questions do come from students. And the other thing I will say is that we really like questions to be questions, not statements. So with those 2 provisions in mind, delighted to hear, right here in front.
Microphone's coming.
Is it on? Yes.
You've talked about keeping jobs in New Jersey. How is the state working to bring in new companies and new businesses?
Well, I think a few things the state's doing to try to do that. First is to improve our tax climate and our regulatory climate. Over the first year of the Christie administration, regulations are down 1/3 over the last year of the Corzine administration. And regulatory policy sometimes is necessary, but oftentimes is a hidden tax on business when they have to spend more and more, not only in fees, but also in consultants and lawyers to be able to comply with these regulations. So that's one way we're trying to do it. Secondly, for the first time in New Jersey history, we have a lieutenant governor. And Kim Guadagno and I had to basically shape this job because the only job that the Constitution gives to the lieutenant governor is to replace the governor in his absence or death. So beside Kim coming in every morning to make sure I'm showing up at work and then taking my pulse, the Constitution gives her nothing to do. And so one of the things we decided to give Kim to do would be to lead our economic revitalization effort. And she has established a business action center that is staffed every day of the business week to deal with questions coming in for businesses who want to consider New Jersey. Also doing outreach. We've set up a public-private partnership called Choose New Jersey, which is funded all by private money, which is going out and marketing New Jersey across the country to businesses that are interested in relocating. And we're being very aggressive in terms of our use of the tax code with tax incentives to be able to draw businesses into New Jersey. And we've had some great successes in the first 16 months. Honeywell has decided to keep its corporate headquarters in New Jersey and expand it, adding over 1,000 jobs. BASF has decided to be in New Jersey. Panasonic has decided to keep its North American headquarters in New Jersey. Bayer has decided to consolidate all of its northeastern operations, and then its entire North American headquarters will be in New Jersey. So we have had some real successes early on, and I think you're going to hear some more to come in the next couple of months. And so those are the things we're doing to try to aggressively outreach. And lastly, I think that the tone that we're setting and the blueprint we're laying down that's now being followed by other states is also getting the attention of businesses in other places, and I think that's been helpful.
Other questions? Right in the front here.
You've done a great job expecting the public schools to start being accountable for how they spend money. Do you have more plans to have the teachers accountable for their performance and regarding test scores, et cetera?
I do. I'm sure that you've all seen the reaction to my ideas for education reform in New Jersey. The NJEA has spent about $2.6 million in the last 3 weeks on fabulous ads about me on TV. Don't be fooled by these ads. These ads are not having anything to do with a millionaire's tax or anything else. What they have to do with is the education reform policies that we put forward that they oppose. And they seem to be pretty simple ones to me. I think the overwhelming majority of public school teachers in New Jersey are really good, hardworking people who are doing a good job. But we do not have a system in New Jersey where they're held accountable for results in any meaningful way, nor are they rewarded for excellence. This is one of the last professions left in America where we do not reward excellence and there are no consequences for failure. And so what we say is a new evaluation system, which is 50% on student achievement, 50% on teacher practice, because we recognize that teaching is still a craft. And so to really evaluate the effectiveness of the teacher, you can't look just at how students perform. You must also look at how the teacher performs in the classroom. And that's going to mean a lot more work from administrators, principals, department chairs to be in the classrooms much more frequently to evaluate how teachers are doing. We would then use that teacher evaluation system as a basis to decide three things. First, compensation. Right now, compensation is determined purely based upon seniority. If you wake up in the morning and your feet hit the floor and it's the beginning of a new school year, you get a raise. And if you're the best teacher in the school or the most ineffective teacher in the school, you get the same thing. You just go on your steps up the ladder that are based purely upon seniority. We would use it for pay differentiation. Second, we would use it for tenure decisions. Now, under the system we propose, you could still get tenure after 3 years of teaching. But if you got 2 years in a row of a partially effective rating or 1 year of an ineffective rating, you would lose your tenure. And then you could earn it back. But you'd have to earn it back in the same way you earned it in the first place, 3 good years in a row. This should no longer be the situation where, in our view, after 3 years you get a job for life. And regardless of what you do, absent committing a crime, you're in. Our students deserve better than that. The third thing we would use it for is how to determine who's laid off when there's a reduction in force. Right now, the rule is LIFO, last in, first out. So regardless of how well a teacher's doing, if that teacher is the lowest person on the totem pole in terms of seniority, they are laid off. And even if the most ineffective teacher in the school is at 20 years, that teacher stays. How does it make our schools better? To determine who the teachers at the front of the classroom are when there's a need for reductions in force, purely by how many years they've been there. Now, it may be that seniority plays a role in that, but it should not be the only factor that we consider, and it is. Those are the main drivers of our education reform policy. It's about accountability and having the best teachers paid more so that they're incentivized to stay. One of the most ridiculous arguments I've heard is that this will take camaraderie out of the schoolhouse. That if in fact, and they make this argument, that if teachers know that they're going to get paid based on performance, that they'll be competing with each other for the money and therefore won't work together. Well, I guess that means that people at Facebook don't work together. People at Microsoft don't work together. People at Ford Motor don't work together. People at General Motors don't work together. People at IBM don't work together. They're all competing for excellence and to get the best raises. Yet part of the element of that and the element of any good evaluation of a teacher is about what kind of team player you are too. Are you working to make the whole school a better place? Are you working to help improve your colleagues? That's a part of the teacher practice portion of the 50% side of that evaluation. And so they set up strawmen. They say, well, now the governor just wants to determine pay and seniority based upon tests. Well, only 35% of our evaluation system is based on testing. The other 15% of the student performance side is based on grades and other measures that we have of how students are performing, that they use every day in schools now. Their conduct, how they participate in extracurricular activities or co-curricular activities, all the things that you evaluate all the time. The last thing I'll tell you is this. The teachers union will tell you that I am simplistic and that this issue is much too complex and that you need a PhD in education to even begin to understand whether someone's an effective teacher or not. I would ask all of you in this audience who have had teachers had children rather, in schools from kindergarten to 12th grade, how long did it take you to figure out whether your child had a good teacher or an ineffective teacher when you had them in the classroom? I would guess that for most of you, by the time you got done with back to school night, you had a really good idea. It may have even been before that When you turn to your friend and said, oh, well, you know, this year my daughter has Mrs. Smith, and they go, good luck. Or they say, this year my daughter has Miss Jones, and they go, oh, God, we love her. She's amazing. She's the best teacher in the school. Now, that shouldn't be the only way we determine it, but don't tell me that we're too stupid to know how to judge whether a teacher's effective or ineffective. This is the bottom line. My fight with the teachers union has gotten a lot of publicity over time, and it's brought me about $11 million now worth of abuse on network television, paid for by the dues of teachers all across New Jersey. And here's what I say. This is the only fight worth having. This is the fight of my governorship. If we do not improve our schools in Asbury Park, where we spend $30,000 per pupil per year, $30,000 per pupil per year, and less than half the children can do math at 8th grade level, or $24,000 per pupil per year in Newark. And if a child who enters the 9th grade in Newark this year, that child has a 23% chance of graduating in 4 years. Now, the teachers union say our system is fine. Yeah, it's fine, unless you live in Asbury Park, or you live in Newark, or you live in Jersey City, or Camden, or Trenton. And my party tells me I'm nuts. I got about 18 votes in Newark in 2009. And they say, Governor, what are you doing? Picking a fight with the teachers union over Newark. Like, if you do really well, what are you going to get, 35 votes in 2013? It's not the point. The point is, I was born in Newark. My parents were born in Newark and lived there most of their lives. My grandparents on both sides were born in Newark. If my parents hadn't borrowed $2,000 from my grandmothers in 1967 to put a down payment on a $22,000 house in Livingston, because they didn't want me to go to kindergarten in Newark. If I had stayed in the post-1967 Newark public school system, I will tell you what I'm convinced of. I wouldn't be standing here. I would not be the governor of New Jersey. And what I think about is, how many children right now are sitting in Newark and Patterson and Camden and Trenton and Jersey City public schools who have all the God-given gifts to be governor, but never will be because we didn't have the courage or the will to stand up to a bunch of bullying adults who have said the status quo works for us, so we don't care about anybody else. I'm not going to stand for that for as long as I'm governor, and I'm willing to stake my governorship on that issue. So I thank you for asking.
Governor, in an effort to constrain public sector costs, do you think New Jersey would benefit from the aggressive methods that Governor Walker has taken in Wisconsin?
You know, I have to tell you, I don't think that we need to do that in New Jersey, what's happened in Wisconsin. I think that through a combination of necessary legislation on things like health benefits and pension reform, and a truly aggressive adversarial collective bargaining, that we can achieve the same things. I have no interest in taking away collective bargaining from people. I believe in collective bargaining. But what I believe in is truly adversarial collective bargaining, where each side is representing a different side. See, what's happened in New Jersey over time is, and Governor Corzine is the perfect example of this, he stood on the steps of the State House at a CWA rally, which is the main state workers union, and he said, I'll fight to get you a good contract. Well, who the hell is he fighting with? Like, the fight's over, right? I mean, he's representing the taxpayers. They want the taxpayers' money. He says, I'll fight to get you a good contract. You go, okay, game over. All that's left is the truce documents after the war has been fought and lost. And what they did back in those days was they didn't sit at a rectangle table and have adverse negotiations. They sat at a round table, held hands, and sang Kumbaya, and decided how much of your money they were going to take. That's where collective bargaining doesn't work. But if collective bargaining is what it is right now in New Jersey, because I'm going through CWA negotiations, and I got to tell you, I know I'm doing well because they've already sued me once. So I'm doing great, because when they start suing you, that's when you know you're winning. You sit across the table, and I represent the taxpayers in New Jersey. And I'm going to try to drive the best bargain I can for the taxpayers. And the folks representing the union, their job is to drive the best bargain they can for their members. I have no problem with that type of collective bargaining. But if we have collective bargaining where everybody's conspiring together to stick it to the taxpayers, then I don't like collective bargaining. So I didn't take the approach Scott Walker did in Wisconsin, despite the fact that I like Scott, I have great respect for him. I campaigned for him. I'm glad he won. And we talked all during that crisis. And I gave him my advice as we went along. I just don't think it was the appropriate approach for New Jersey. And so I won't criticize him for what he did in Wisconsin, because heck, I'm not in Wisconsin. And I don't know whether he had tried a bunch of different things and just felt like there was no way, given the history of what went on in Wisconsin, that he could do it any other way. But I don't think we have to do that. I'm still convinced that if we have some appropriate reforms of a system that was set up statutorily, so we have to fix it in a statutory way, and then have truly adversarial collective bargaining, that we'll be able to get costs under control. We'll see. We'll see how good I am at it.
Thank you. Governor, let me tell you where I'm coming from with the question. On the fiscal issues and fiscal discipline, I'm very much pleased with what you've done, and I want to congratulate you for it. And I come from the sort of background where one would expect that. I've been an institutional money manager for the better part of 30 years, spent 3 years in the Marine Corps. The question I have is about social issues, and the topic is family planning. One of my worries is that it looks to me like the lower classes in the United States are getting further and further away from mainstream. And if you listen, if I make two stipulations, one, that family planning is an NPV positive activity. You know what I'm talking about there?
I do.
And secondly, that for poor people, they can't get it any way other than the sort of activities that you're against. In other words, what you're saying is it's duplicative. If I say it's not duplicative, they're not going to get family planning unless there's funds for family planning. My question is, if it's NPV positive and they're not going to get it any other way, why wouldn't it be a good idea?
Well, I disagree with the premise of your question, which is the second part of your stipulations, which is they're not going to get it any other way, which is completely false. We have in every county in New Jersey federally qualified health clinics that we fund last year in the amount of $46 million, and which we will continue to fund as proposed in next year's budget. In every county in New Jersey that provides family planning services and other health-related services to both men and women across the state of New Jersey. The part of it that I vetoed was $7.5 million that was going to private family planning clinics. That's duplicative to me. If I'm spending $46 million to provide those type of services in every county in New Jersey, why do I have to spend another $7.5 million to provide those services in the counties where those family planning centers exist? And there's about 58 of them across New Jersey. Now, when I vetoed that $7.5 million, people said that you were going to see massive closings of family planning clinics. Out of 58, 6 closed. 52 still operate, in addition to the 21 federally qualified health clinics. And so I absolutely believe that family planning is a net positive. And I absolutely do believe that the government has a role in providing those services in addition to pap smears, mammograms, and other type of preventive care for women, prostate exams, and other type of preventive care for men. And we do. And we do every day in New Jersey, and we do through a combination of state and federal funds. And so, you know, unfortunately in this, there becomes the air of politics and people's separate political agendas. And I'm just not going to spend money on two things at the same time that are doing the same thing. And when I spend $46 million on federally qualified health clinics across the state, the idea that I'm going to cut $7.5 million from private health clinics across the state, I don't think deprives women of health care in one ounce. And that doesn't count the fact that anyone can go, when they need more extensive care, can go to any one of our hospitals in New Jersey, and no one can be denied care. And the state has a $950 million charity care system in New Jersey where we support those hospitals for providing that type of care. So I just think that that $7.5 million is a duplicative spend. It's done for political purposes, and I'm not going to knuckle under to it just because people say it isn't. It is, with all the other things that we provide, and that's why I've done what I've done. And I'll look at whatever the legislature proposes this year, and I won't predict what I'm going to do, but if they do the same thing they did last year, I'm going to do the same thing I did last year, and that's veto it.
One more question, and how about this woman sitting right in front in the pink jacket? Yes.
Thank you, Governor, for a very insightful talk. May I say, we love you in New Jersey.
Thank you.
We would love you even more in the White House.
Is that a question?
Yeah. People are coming up with all new ways to ask that question. Listen, let me be, for the 354th time, as absolutely clear as I can be. I appreciate it, and it's very flattering. It really is. And for somebody like me who literally, I had lunch today with a friend of mine who helped to work on our campaign. He came down to the State House to have lunch with me today. And he was talking to me about the Time 100 thing, the 100 most influential people in the world. Well, when that magazine came out, I was one of the people on the cover, and the magazine came to our house, and my 15-year-old daughter was the first one to get it. And she looked and she said, "The world?" Nothing like your teenage daughter to bring you immediately back to earth. And this friend of mine said, this is all so amazing. This is a guy I've been friends with for a long time. He said, this is all so amazing. He said, think about where we were 2 years ago. He said, 2 years ago at this time, we were in the middle of a contentious Republican primary against an opponent who didn't think I was really conservative. And now I got a whole bunch of people who think I'm too conservative. It's interesting the way life goes in New Jersey. And people saying there's no chance, even if he wins the primary, that he's going to win the general election. I mean, this is New Jersey. We have 700,000 more registered Democrats than Republicans. I was running against an incumbent governor. We had not elected a Republican statewide in 12 years. And we haven't elected a Republican United States Senator since 1972. So I think it's safe to say that, kind of the Vegas odds on me being here were pretty long. Especially when you're running against an incumbent who's going to outspend you 3-1 with $30 million of his own money. I tell you this because I don't ever lose perspective on that. And while I'm really flattered by your comment and by the comments and questions about running for President of the United States that lots of people have been giving me over the last number of months, I know who I am. And I was meant for this job at this time. And this is the job I asked for. And I'm not going to leave this job until it's finished. And that's the obligation that I took when I asked for your vote. And I can't, that'd be like, I'm married for 25 years. My wife and I are college sweethearts. And we got married right out of college while I was still in law school. I got her when she was really young and she didn't know any better. And it would be like, that guy who's married for 25 years and then all of a sudden, the woman who's, half his age turns his head and he goes, well, she's, 23, why not? I made a commitment to this place now, and just because there's a bit of a siren song being sung from the Potomac, I know who I am. I made a commitment here. I'm going to keep my commitment here. And I also know something else. I'm not ready to be president. And I've had people make all kinds of arguments to me about, well, President Obama's experience or President Bush's experience or President Clinton's experience. And see, you missed the point. All those men decided that they looked in the mirror and in their heart they felt they were ready. Unless and until you can do that, you have no business, in my opinion, asking for anybody's vote. And I know I'm not ready. And so the worst thing in the world would be people say, you could win. And I said, well, yeah, I know I could win. But that's like the dog chasing the garbage truck, right? What happens if I actually catch it? And I win? You know? That's when things really start to get nerve-wracking. I'll end with this. Rich and Andrew were both with me the day I walked into the governor's office for the first time, on January 20th of 2010. And when we walked into that office for the first day, I can tell you, I did not have a moment of self-doubt that I was ready. I'd been U.S. Attorney for 7 years. I'd made lots of hard decisions. I'd campaigned hard in an uphill race for the job. I knew what I believed and who I was, and I knew what I wanted to do for New Jersey. And I think that I've been able to govern the way I've governed aggressively because I'm not filled with self-doubt. I will tell you that if I were ever at this moment just elevated to the presidency, I would be filled with self-doubt. And you can't lead if you have self-doubt. It's different than introspection. And we all should have introspection. It's different. So if I ever run for president of the United States, I'll run at that moment when I look in the mirror and say to myself, I'm ready. I'm ready. If I win, I'm ready. It shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be, I could win, so I hope I'm ready. It should be, I'm ready, now I hope I can win. And until I get myself in that spot, if I ever do, until that comes, I'm not going to do it. No matter how attractive it is and no matter how wonderful it is, you know, people say all the time, well, gosh, you're getting tired of the question, aren't you, Governor? I mean, geez, people ask you all the time, and you keep saying no, and people keep asking you. I'm like, what kind of pompous ass would you have to be to say, oh, it's so tiring? I'm so weary and worn from people asking me, please won't you be the leader of the free world? Please won't you move to the White House? I mean, how pompous and self-important do you have to be? It is extraordinarily flattering as someone who loves this country and believes in everything that we've stood and fought for to even be thought of in that way. But I can't allow flattery to get in the way of common sense, and I can't allow opportunity to trump my own good judgment. And so that's why I say no. I say no because in my heart, as much as my ego might want to say yes, my heart tells me no. And so I think I owe it to the people of this state to keep the commitment I made to them in 2009. And I think I owe it to myself and to my family to not ever ask them to go into that endeavor until I can look at them and look at myself and say, I'm ready and my country needs me. So I appreciate the comment and the implied question. And I really appreciate all of you coming here on a Friday evening to give me the chance to talk to you about all this. As a guy who went to the University of Delaware, and I say this with some hesitation, but in the last month, I've been asked to give speeches at Princeton and Harvard. And my kids think this is the most hysterical thing in the world. My daughter this morning was leaving for school, that same 15-year-old, and she said to me, so what are you in or out tonight? And I said, well, I'll be home, but a little bit later. She said, why? I said, I've been asked to give a speech at Princeton. And she just rolled her eyes. And she said, oh, you're going to be intolerable. And then, in a way that only a 15-year-old girl could do, she walked away from me after that. And then she turned back around, she goes, oh yeah, can I have $5 for lunch? And the great thing about kids is they see nothing discordant about having just obliterated me with her eye roll and her words, and then asking me for $5 after. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to be insulted by my 15-year-old daughter. Thank you all very much.